Good morning. Welcome to the Fireside Chat. My name is Brian Kane. I'm the co-founder and publisher of BioProcess International. And along with Ann Montgomery, who's the editor-in-chief and co-founder of BioProcess as well, we are your co-moderators for today's session. The theme of this discussion is bringing it all together for commercialization, perspectives from every stage. For many years, the biopharmaceutical industry has approached product development, upstream, downstream manufacturing, and the supporting analytical methods as a series of separate and independent steps and processes. Many companies' infrastructures have been designed to mirror this approach, with each department responsible for only achieving that specific and individual goal. It's certainly an approach that still works, but like many things that do work, it may not remain to be the best way or the most efficient way to achieve a goal. So in today's competitive competitive environment, the dynamics of biopharmaceutical development are constantly changing and evolving. Technologies are changing, the science is changing, the management expectations are changing. So working in process silos doesn't make as much sense as it used to. And that's okay, because like in every industry, biopharmaceuticals must continually evolve and adapt in order to move forward. In Tuesday's keynote, Rohini from Amgen mentioned that the average cost to bring a drug to market today is about $2.6 billion. And the average time to bring a drug to market is now about 128 months. That's really too much money and too much time to sustain success. So in order to mature and grow as a business, the biopharmaceutical industry must find a way to reduce overall development cost and time to market. The key is not to look at upstream and downstream and analytical as independent processes, but to mirror the format that Barry Walsh created for this conference and look at each phase of development as a complete process. And like marriage and parenting and life, communication is the key to making all things work. All departments must be on the same page and agree to what the ultimate goal is and how to achieve it. This will ensure the latest science and technologies are being utilized and synchronized in an approach which should improve efficiency and efficacy and ultimately lower drug development costs and time to market. So that's really the goal of today's conversation. Barry's put together a terrific panel here that conservatively has over 100 years of combined experience. These folks represent every phase of biopharmaceutical development and have seen what has worked and what has not worked. We have the opportunity this morning to tap into this and take advantage of this group and rely upon their unique experiences and expertise to find out and figure out what they've done, how they've done it, how they've overcome challenges, and apply it to your processes and your businesses. And if we can do that, we can help ourselves, we can help our companies, and ultimately we can help the patients upon which are relying upon us to create the life-saving drugs and treatments. So this is an interactive discussion panel. We're going to focus on four main categories: technology application, platform development, reducing development time, cost, and reduction. We'll ask each panel member the same questions, and then we'll provide you, the audience, the opportunity to join in on the conversation. So before we get started, let me just do a brief introduction of our panelists here. Paul Wu is currently Director of Upstream Development, Bayer Global Biological Development Organization. Paul has over 20 years of experience and is responsible for cell line generation and cell culture process development. Ali Siapush, at the end of the table, is currently president and founder of PharmEffects, a biopharma consulting company. He has over 20 years of experience working with Dendreon and Amgen, where he was responsible for early and late-stage product development. He has helped Dendreon's automated manufacturing platform and provided technical support for the commercial manufacturing. Gunter Yashies, currently Senior Director of Strategic Customer Relations at GE Healthcare Life Sciences, has published countless articles and has published a number of books, including Process Chromatography Handbook in 2008 and the development of a therapeutic monoclonal antibody products in 2010. In addition, in 2012, Gunter was awarded the BioProcess International Award for Thought Leader of the Decade in Downstream Processing. And finally, Catherine Chalupka is currently a senior scientist at Amgen, and she is responsible for commercial development, process development, and characterization from phase 2 through commercial. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Ann Montgomery, and we're going to get the conversation and the questions started. Ann.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin with talking about some of the broader issues and narrow into some of the more specific concerns. We're going to begin with this question: how are technologies and how is science changing traditional drug development models, and how can they accelerate end-to-end development? I'm going to pick on the upstream person first. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've had 22 years of experience in supporting commercial manufacturing and doing process development. And then I started work with CHO cells 30 years ago when I went to school. But I think over that time, the biggest change to me had been that the process was a black box 20 years ago. Process is a product to the extreme, so we don't get to question any science part of it, versus now that we are really asked to understand what we do, everything we do, how it affects critical quality attributes. So I think that's the biggest change over my career, and that has resulted even those of us in upstream to understand everything we do, including raw material, how it affects the quality attributes. I think the technology and the science that's related to this is, in our company, we need to do real-time analytics on the process. Like Brian said, we need to work very closely with our purification colleagues, or analytics colleagues. We've developed many miniaturized capture steps, quick purification steps, and miniaturized analytics that even us in upstream can perform. So to me, those are the trends in my career that I see.
Okay, so I mean, anecdotally, I was tidying up an office and moved on and found papers from our marketing folks back from the 80s when we were about to launch protein A resins. And on these papers, it said that the forecast for the next 10 years, and this was in the mid-80s or so, was about 10 liters. And a couple of years later, I became head of the BioProcess business in Germany and sold the first 150 liters to a customer. And in the meantime, it's thousands and thousands of liters. And that's just a commercial indicator of what has happened. But what really that means is that there are process platforms now which rely a lot on affinity resins, even in other processes than just MABs. That is an increasing trend. That gives robustness to the downstream process further on, and you can basically cut the time very much shorter than if you would have to develop the process from scratch every single time. And I guess looking back, that's the biggest change in processing of biological molecules, together with using CHO cells and secretory systems, and making everything just simpler.
Ali.
Good morning. So maybe I can sort of start a little bit more general and talk about many of the members of the audience look to be about the same age as me, so I assume you've been in the industry for just as long. I remember when I first started, we were working on EPO, erythropoietin, and our yields were in the micrograms per liter. And today, had we known then what we would be doing today, I think our heads would have spun. People are reporting 10, 12 grams per liter on a regular basis, which is really unheard of by the standards when we started. So I think that's been one of the really big things that's happened in the industry. A few of the other things that I've seen, and I certainly hope that we have a chance to sort of talk through these things, the invention, the creation of online systems for monitoring your process, whether it be probes of different sorts or integration of analytical technologies in your process to be able to really monitor how your process is performing. Again, I remember many years ago when we would run things and then we'd have to wait 2 weeks to find out how things looked. I can't really even imagine doing the work that way today. Many of you that are working in this field probably couldn't imagine having to do it that way, but I distinctly remember we'd have to constantly go back and forth to our analytics group and bug them for the results because we had to design the next experiment and we didn't know how the last one went. So today that just doesn't happen. The other big thing that we're seeing is the whole integration of disposables and how they're becoming larger and larger scale, and the need to think about whether or not disposables are really a viable alternative for you. And as the yields have increased, this becomes increasingly viable for processes that we really couldn't even imagine use of disposables for. So those are a few things that I've seen. Increasingly more sophisticated analytical tools that make possible analyses that a few years ago would take many, many weeks. These things can be done very quickly now, which really is helpful in the process. And I will say that some of the things that I've seen which really help to move products forward faster, especially in the later stages of the programs, which is where most of my experience has been, don't have anything to do with technology at all. It's people, the teams that you work on, and how effectively those teams work together and how effectively they're held together and communicate and pass information back and forth. The more effective those teams work, the faster you're able to get through, despite the technical challenges that you might face. So I certainly hope that we will have an opportunity to talk about some of those issues as well. And I sincerely hope that this is a two-way dialogue. But we are by no means the world's foremost experts in these areas. We've worked in them for a long time. But, we certainly have a lot to learn also.
Catherine?
I think we've covered a lot with these three folks. I'm not sure how much more I can add. But switching gears a little bit more to the operations side, I think that we have learned quite a bit about our products. We have a lot of analytical techniques where we can now get data very, very quickly. I think what's valuable also is a little bit of what Ali touched upon, which is the flexible manufacturing, being able to implement something very quick, get through your process, and then switch over to your next product. And with some of our traditional equipment, we used to have very large stainless steel plants. Doing that changeover is very challenging and time consuming. Going with some of the new technologies, the new flexible technologies, it's much, much easier to go through and say, if you have something disposable, use it once, discard it, and then you can very much plug and play for your next molecules. So from an operational standpoint, that gives us a lot of flexibility, and of course, the analytics, having those rapidly or as quickly as possible so that you can know if your batch was okay and you can release it and move that forward.
Is there anything else you'd like to? Okay. What results, or perhaps what other results, are you seeing from these new approaches so far? And are you encountering resistance to these changes? And we can start backwards this time with Ali.
The resistance part is kind of interesting because there's always good reasons for the resistance, or at least in the minds of the resistors, there's good reason for the resistance. What I've seen a lot of times, the trepidation for incorporating new things has to do with lack of knowledge about the reliability of new technologies that come along. That makes especially senior management very hesitant to incorporate new technologies simply because they haven't been around as long, and as good as they might sound, incorporating them in your process only to discover that maybe it wasn't as reliable as you thought is difficult. And I remember sort of examples on both sides of that argument. I remember convincing senior management about incorporation of probes that helped us to monitor our cell cultures more effectively. and having that be very, very successful. And I also remember other technologies that got incorporated that really didn't work that well and ended up being nightmares that the company spent many, many dollars on. And I don't want to name anything because I don't want to single out any suppliers that ended up being nightmares that we decided to abandon at a later date. So I can see both sides of the argument, and I think the instrument manufacturers and new technology companies can really help advance things by spending quite a bit of time on making sure that the technologies that they want to introduce are robust and therefore, reliable for companies to use. And as they become more mainstream, I think the resistance kind of dies down.
Catherine, on the operational side or commercial side of things?
Yeah, on the operations side, a lot of times what I've heard from folks is you get to operations and like new technology dies right there. And it's unfortunate, and I think it's much, much easier to stick with what you know, and I know that's what people are comfortable with. But if we don't start taking a little bit of risk and moving forward with new technologies, we're never going to move forward. With the disposables, I know a lot of the talks during this conference focused on, yes, disposables are great, but you have to worry about extractables, leachables, things like that. Absolutely. And that's something that we're going to have to go through and evaluate. But just kind of abandoning the whole project is tough to do. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward at all. So I will say from an operations standpoint, there has been resistance. But a lot of times once we get over that hurdle, a lot of times people will come back and say, oh, it really wasn't that bad once we got through the initial shock of, yes, we're going to change from our traditional stainless steel to say something disposable. We're going to try a new technology. We're going to implement it.
Let me add a couple of points, because this is something. Is my thing working? Yeah, it is. This is something that we can sort of just talk about and pass over and move on, or we can sort of think about why the resistance exists, right? And if you're working for big companies that have dollars to invest in new technologies, et cetera, there's the whole question of who wants to be responsible for the technology failing, right? If you're talking about a commercial product, you're talking about revenue for the company, dollars, et cetera, right? And do you want to be the person that advocates for the implementation of a new technology that hasn't been used, the robustness of which has not been demonstrated yet? Do you want to be the guy to raise your hand and say, yes, we should do this, later on to discover it really didn't work that well, right? That's not going to be a very good move. And for new programs that are coming along, the challenge is always going to be, is the technology robust enough? Is it going to slow us down, right? If you have issues with this new technology, yes, it looks really shiny and fancy and all of that, and gives you information that you weren't getting before, but are we going to have issues? Is it going to slow us down? And that is a different kind of risk. So you can take a little bit more risk because you're still in development phase and maybe you have other backup technologies that you can use, but it's just a slightly different risk profile. But for commercial products in particular, I remember having many conversations about these new technologies that were coming along for monitoring your process in particular, and having that debate and having our executive VP of operations at the time asking, is it broke? No, but this is better. If it's broke, don't fix it. And there's certainly merit to that.
You have to determine when to take the appropriate risk. I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it's determining when to take the risk. And to your point, taking it earlier on, trying it at a smaller scale, getting that data to show that, yes, this is robust. We've tested several lots of whatever it is. Kind of gives upper management a little bit more comfort with moving forward with things. But I think you're absolutely right in that you need to have somebody at kind of one of those higher levels advocate and say, you know what, we do want to take appropriate risks. We do want to move forward and try new things. And if you don't have that, especially with a commercial project, it's very challenging.